Hi guys, this is Pranav here from Prepco. Welcome to the fourth lecture in the legal reasoning series. In today's lecture, we will be covering the law of crimes. If you haven't seen our earlier lectures, a link for the same will be given in the description below. Feel free to check it out. I'm sure they'll be helpful for you. So let's start with our lecture on law of crimes. So firstly, what is a crime? Now Blackstone, who is a very prominent legal scholar, has defined crime to be an act committed or omitted which is in violation of a public law, which forbids or commands a person to do or abstain from doing that act. So basically, like I'll give you an example. An act committed would mean if I murder you, that is in violation of a public law, which is the IPC, which prohibits me from doing that. So that constitutes a crime. Omission, on the other hand, if I fail to pay my taxes, even that is a crime, right? Because a public law, which is the Income Tax Act, mandates that I should pay taxes on time. And furthermore, crime is a violation of the public rights and duties which are due to the whole community. So the major difference between criminal law and civil law is that criminal law is any crime you commit is against the state, right? So if I fail to pay taxes, it is not an individual person who is wronged, right? So it is the state who will take action against me in the form, like an arm of the state is the income tax authorities. They are the ones who will take action against me. Furthermore, if I murder someone, it is not the victim's family who will prosecute me. It is actually the state who will prosecute me. The police will investigate, the public prosecutor will show that evidence before court, and it is the state who will prosecute me. So this is because any crime is seen as a wrong against the community as a whole, and it does not restrict itself to one person, correct? It is not just the victim who is wronged, it is the entire community which is wronged. So let's move on to the elements of the crime. So firstly, it is essential that a human being or person should be involved. Now a person can also be a juristic person, like even a company can be involved in a crime, correct? So all these frauds or these big money scams, etc., all those are also crimes. So even companies can be involved in a crime. Now a human being, individual of course can be involved, but even a juristic person can be involved in a crime. The second is that the action of that person should be done with an evil intention. Now if I should intend to do that wrongful act, like if I'm just if I just commit a murder in the heat of the moment or by accident, then I will not be punished for murder. It will actually, I'll be punished for culpable homicide, which does not amount to murder, and a lesser punishment will be given. So for a crime, it is essential that a human being or a person should be involved. The crime should be done with an evil intention. Now that evil intention should also result in an act or an omission. So these two terms which I have given, evil intention is mens rea. Mens rea is the Latin term for it. It is a legal maxim. So mens rea means evil intention to do the act. Now act or omission is actus reus. If you act on that intention, then it becomes a crime, right? If I don't act on my intention, if I don't communicate it to someone else, and if it's just in my mind, then there is no crime committed. In my mind I can think of anything, right? And last thing is that it should cause an injury to another person. Now if I just my act or omission should result in an injury to another person. So only when all four of these things are met will there be a crime which is committed. So let's now move on to the stages of a crime. Now there are four stages of a crime. First is there should be intention, which is mens rea. Second, there should be preparation. There is preparation for committing the crime. Third, there is an attempt to commit the crime. So attempt and accomplishment is linked with actus rea. So this is where you are acting on your evil intention. Third is the attempt, and fourth is if you succeed with the crime or not. Correct. So now we'll see what does these four stages means, and at every stage there are circumstances in which you can be punished at any stage. Okay, it is not necessary that for every crime you need to accomplish it or complete it for you to be punishable under the IPC, which is the Indian Penal Code. Okay. So let's see what intention means. Now intention is the very first stage in commission of a crime. Intention to commit a crime is not punishable unless it is made known to other persons either by words or conduct. So as I told you initially also, if I just intend in my mind, if I'm just thinking, I have a wild thought that today I am going to kill someone, in my anger I just think that by itself is not a crime. But if I go around telling 4 people that this guy I'm going to kill, I'm going to kill our prime minister, now that becomes a punishable crime. Okay, so there are few crimes which are punishable even at the intention stage under the Indian Penal Code. One of these examples is waging a war against the government. So even an intention to wage war against the government is punishable. So if, like for example, if 2 people have just made plans, make plans goes into preparation stage. If they've communicated to each other that we let us bring down the present government by doing unlawful protests, etc., or not peaceful protests is what I mean. So that can constitute waging war against the government. So even an intention to do that will be punishable under the IPC. Similarly, even for dacoity, if you show that intention and you if 4 people communicate their intention to each other, then also there is it is punishable under the IPC, even if none of the other stages of the crime are reached. So this is we understood what intention means. Next is preparation. Now naturally it is very difficult for the prosecution to prove the necessary preparation has been made for commission of an offense, because any person can give another explanation for the things he has. For example, if a person purchases a pistol and loads it with bullets, is it necessary that he bought is it concluded that he bought that pistol just to murder someone else? He could have bought that for a million different reasons, right? So there it is difficult in the sense for the police to show this. But similarly, if they are successful in showing preparation for some crime, even those preparation is punishable. Like the earlier examples which we saw, they are apt here also. So if there is a preparation to wage war, there were plans made, like on this day we are going to plant a bomb, etc., etc. So even that is punishable under the IPC. It is not necessary that the bomb should explode and only then will the persons become punishable. Even the intention and preparation to wage war is punishable under the IPC. The next stage is the attempt. Now attempt is also known as a preliminary crime. Now section 32 of the Indian Penal Code 1860, which is the law on crimes in India, deals with attempt to commit offences, and there are and it also provides punishment for attempt. Now there are certain essentials of the attempt. Firstly, the mens rea. Mens rea is an essential. There should be an guilty intention on part of the person. It should be an evil intention to do some wrong. Next essential is that this act should be done towards committing the offense. There should be some act done towards committing the offense. And third, the act should fall short of the offense. I'll give you a very simple example. I I have an intention to murder X person. I bought a gun to for that. I went with the gun. There I fired a shot, but I missed. The bullet did not hit the person. Now here I will still be guilty for attempt to murder, because because the first all the three essentials are met. That is, I had mens rea. I had a guilty intention, evil intention of murdering the person. Next, I did some act. I bought the pistol. I went to him. I fired the shot. Third, the act fell short of the offense in the because the bullet missed the person. He was not murdered. So if the bullet had hit him and he had died, I would be guilty of murder. But here I will only be punishable for attempt to murder. Okay, so this is the difference between attempt and the actual commission of the crime. And of course the last stage is completion. Now if the bullet had hit him, I would have succeeded in my act, and if I succeed, then I will be guilty for the act. Of course I will be guilty for murdering the person. So these are the 4 stages of a crime. At for some offenses I will be guilty even if I have the intention. For some I will be guilty if I have done preparation towards it, and so on and so on. For some I will be guilty under for an attempt to do that crime, and lastly if I complete that offense, then of course I will be guilty. Now moving on from the stages of crime, there are also some theories of punishment. If recently you see, there is a call to bring in a change in the law and provide capital punishment for all rape cases. So this is something which is said by Karnataka High Court also recently. Now the capital punishment can fall under 2 of these theories. The theory behind capital punishment: first, it acts as a deterrent. That is, the idea is that if we apply capital punishment to rapes, then people who intend to commit a rape in the future will be afraid that if I do this act, I will be hanged to death. And the other thing it can fall in is retributive theory, that he's done such a heinous offense that he deserves the worst punishment possible, like it is vengeance basically, right? So this is what I mean by theories of punishment. So let us understand what each of these different theories means. Also, in case you have any doubts, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and we will surely attempt to answer and clarify all of your doubts. Okay, so let's move on to what we mean by the deterrent theory. So as I told you, deter means to abstain from doing an act. According to this theory, the object of the punishment is to deter the offenders from repeating the same course of conduct. And it's not just to deter the offenders, it is also to deter prospective offenders, right? It is not just to deter the person who has actually done an act from doing the same in the future. It is also to deter others who may intend to do a similar act in the future, right? So this is what we mean by deterrent theory. It is basically to set we will punish the offender and set an example for the society at large, that no one should do this act or see the consequences basically. So this is what we mean by deterrent theory. Next is preventive theory. Now this says that the objective of the punishment is to prevent the offenders. Now the offenders can be punished when offender and his notorious activities are checked, which is possible by disablement. So like a lot of preventive detention acts are like they are flow from this theory. So if you see what happened in Jammu and Kashmir, for example, after the Article 370 was modified and the special status was, for JNK was revoked, the government thought that it is better to prevent the leaders, the political leaders in Kashmir, by taking all of them into preventive custody, so that they cannot like go out, give speeches, or in any manner inflame the situation basically. So this is, they prevented the prospective offenders, right? Like the government thought that the political class of Jammu and Kashmir is sure to commit an offense. So before they had done before they had actually committed the offense, the government took them into custody. They put them under house arrest. So this is what we mean by preventive theory, right? So it can, like, this is one example. The other idea of that, it is also to disable one offender from committing the offense ever again. So if one person has committed a murder, if I put him in jail for the rest of his life, he will not be able to do that offense again. So there are two parts of this theory, right? So both of these examples we can understand preventive theory through them. Next is retributive theory. Now this is like a very basic form of justice. The retribution is giving in return. So an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So it is basically to satisfy feeling of vengeance of the victim, right? So the most cruel form of punishment that you may give someone, so that they will also feel the pain. So those kinds of punishments are form of retributive theory, right? Next is reformative theory. Now this is a very liberal form of punishment. Now this says that the object of punishment should be reformatory. Now any person, so they go into the background, why the crime was committed. So for behind a person committing a crime, there will be 100 reasons for that, right? So you should understand those reasons and then like make the offender change his ideology. The prison should be a place where the offending person reforms himself, so that his ideology changes. He no longer remains a person who will even think of committing the act again, right? The as I said, the motive behind the offenses and backgrounds of the offenders should be clearly examined as per this theory, and the aim of the punishment should be to reform the person, the offender. Okay, so this is what we mean by reformative theory. It is followed in a lot of countries. Even in India, to a certain extent, this is the theory which the courts have tried to impart, but like it is not the one currently in force in India. In more developed countries, like, or more smaller countries like Sweden, the reformative theory is practiced and is successful to a large extent.
Hey guys, just a short break in the middle of the class to tell you to check out our website or follow the link in the description below to join our test series. We're going to be having sectional tests, full tests, a lot of practice material. Do check out our website. Cheers.
And the last theory is the expiatory theory. Now this theory holds that the punishment whips away the sin and the offender becomes innocent. So after I have given the punishment, he is sin free. It is as if the act was never committed in the first place, right? So this was done in the Hindu law and nowadays it has become something close to retributive theory. So for example, even if we take Sharia law as an example, so as you must have heard, under Sharia law, the punishment for committing a theft is to chop away the hands of the offenders. So after his hands are chopped away, he's free. It's as if he did not commit the act in the first place. So this is expiatory theory. After I punish him, his crime is over. Now he is innocent. Now he can carry on with his life. So this is what we mean by expiatory theory. So this is, I've given you a brief over the theories of the crimes. Of course, there is no need for you to know specific section numbers of IPC and all. Just know that in India, the criminal law, like the procedure of how the steps to be followed is something which is governed by the Criminal Procedure Code, and the actual punishments and which acts are offences, etc., is something which is given under the Indian Penal Code. Now apart from these, there are of course specific laws also which deal with specific crimes. For example, there is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, there is the Dowry Prohibition Act, there is the Domestic Violence Act, etc., etc. So there are a lot of specific laws also which have been enacted to deal with certain specific crimes, but the main two laws dealing with the criminal law in India are the Criminal Procedure Code and the Indian Penal Code, right? And these are the basic theories behind these laws. This is the basic overview of criminal law. Okay, so let's move on to solving an illustrative question. Now this was also asked in CLAT 2020. So I'll read the passage. Common intention implies a pre-arranged plan and acting in concert pursuant to the plan. Common intention comes into being prior to the commission of the act, which need not be a long gap. Now to bring common intention into effect, a pre-concert is not necessary to be proved. But the common intention may well develop on the spot as between a number of persons and could be inferred from the facts and circumstances of each case. So for example, A and B caught hold of C, where only B stabbed C with a knife. But A is also liable for the murder as there was a pre-concerted action. In the case Pandurang vs. State of Hyderabad, the Supreme Court emphasized on this point that prior concert need not be something always very much prior to the incident, but could well be something that may develop on the spot or on the spur of the moment also. Now there is a difference between common intention and similar intention. Common intention does not mean similar intention of several persons. To constitute common intention, it is necessary that the intention of each one of them, like each one of the accused, should be known to the other accused, and it should be shared by them. Now in the case of Dukhmochan Pandey vs. State of Bihar, the Supreme Court held that common intention which developed at the spur of the moment is different from the similar intention actuated by a number of persons at the same time. The distinction between common intention and similar intention may be fine, but it is nonetheless a real one, and if overlooked, it may lead to a miscarriage of justice. The mere presence of an accused together is not sufficient to hold that they shared the common intention to commit the offense in question. It is necessary that the intention of each one of the several persons is known to each other for constituting common intention. So a few important points which we could pick out. So I would suggest that you do this exercise on your own, like you jot down the important points which you are able to understand from this passage, and list them down and compare them to the ones which I have found. Okay. So common intention implies a pre-arranged plan and acting together in pursuant to the plan. Now common intention is something which comes into being prior to the commission of the act. There need not be a long gap between the common intention coming into place and the actual act in pursuit, actual criminal act done. Now pre-concert is not necessary to be proved. As I said, common intention can also be developed on the spot. The example I've reiterated here. Then the difference between common intention and similar intention is that in similar intention, the intention of each party will not be known to the other party, but for common intention, this is essential that the intention of each party should be known to all of the parties. So these are some of the important points which we pulled out from the passage. Now let's go to attempt the question. Okay. So a gang of 6 members went to a bank. They were armed with weapons to commit a heist. Now while 5 of the gang members went inside the bank, Mr. A waited outside the bank to alert them on any threat. During the heist, one of the gang members fired a gun at the branch manager. As a result, he died. All 5 members escaped, but Mr. A was caught and arrested. Now choose the most appropriate option as per the principle stated in the above passage. Now just remember, in the question, all 6 members, the common intention was to commit an armed robbery. Okay, and as a consequence of that armed robbery, it is established that if I'm going with guns, then it is very possible that it may lead to some deaths. Okay. Now the options are: Mr. A is not liable for murder as he was outside the bank and there was no common intention. Option B: Mr. A along with all other members of the gang are liable for murder as there was common intention. Option C: only that person is liable for murder who actually fired the gun. Or option D: Mr. A is liable only for the heist and no other offense. Now the correct option is option B, as all the essentials of the common intention had been satisfied. Each and every one of the 6 persons were aware that they were committing an armed robbery, and as I told you that if you are doing an armed robbery, then it is very probable that any person may fire a shot, and if one person fires a shot and it kills someone, then all of them would be liable for murder, as they all intended that we are going to commit an armed robbery. Hence option B is the correct option. So the next question: Raman and Raghav were riding on a motorcycle on a busy street. Suddenly Aman bumped into their bike. A heated argument started between the 3 of them. While Raghav started abusing Aman, Raman hit Aman with an iron rod lying on the road, and a consequence of this, Aman died. Now choose the correct option. A. Both Raman and Raghav are liable for murder as there was a common intention developed on the spot. Option B. Raghav is not liable for murder as there was no common intention to kill Aman. Option C. No one is liable as Aman was a wrongdoer himself and he started the fight. Or option D. Only Raghav is liable for murder as he started abusing Aman. Now the correct option again is option B. Now here the essentials of common intention were not met, because Raman and Raghav were not aware. Raghav was not aware that Raman intended to hit the biker with the iron rod. It was Raman and Raghav just had an accident while Raghav was involved in a verbal altercation with the biker, Raman in the heat of the moment just picked up an iron rod and hit Aman, right? So Raghav, it is nowhere given that Raghav was aware of this intention, and as the essential points told us and the passage told us, the essential of common intention is that all the accused should be aware of the intention, right? So here Raghav had no idea that Raman intended to murder Aman. Hence option B is the correct option. Now the third question, after reading the passage, which of the following is not correct in relation to the difference between common and similar intention? A. Similar intention is developed prior to the commission of offense, but the common intention is developed only at the time of commission of the offense. B. Under common intention, each of the offender is equally liable for the offense, but under similar intention, each of the offender is differently liable. Option C. In order to determine the existence of similar or common intention, one must analyze the facts and circumstances of each case. Option D. The boundary between similar and common intention is very fine and it may sometimes overlap. Now the correct option should be clear to you. It is option A, because option A is the only incorrect statement. Now let's go back to what option A said. Option A said that similar intention is developed prior to the commission of the offense, but common intention is developed only at the time of commission of the offense. Now this was nowhere stated in the passage. The passage said that common intention preconcert is not a necessary, not a necessity for proving common intention, but it nowhere said that common intention can be developed only at the time of commission. Common intention for sure can be developed before also, at a time prior. Hence option A is the incorrect option and B, C and D are correct statements. The next question, Mr. X and Mr. Y entered into a house at night to commit theft. While committing theft, Mr. Y committed sexual assault on a minor girl of 11 years. Identify which of the following offences is Mr. X liable for. A. Both theft and sexual assault as there was a common intention. B. Only theft as there was a similar intention. C. Only theft as Mr. X had a different intention from Y. D. He would not be liable for any offence. Now the correct option is option C, right? As it is shown that both the parties knew and were aware that they are going to go to commit theft. So the common intention was only with respect to that, right? And it was not the parties never, Mr. X was never aware that Mr. Y had an intention to commit a sexual offense also, right? So only theft because Mr. X had a different intention from Y. Here you may have been confused as to why option B is not correct, right? Because option B says that only theft as there was a similar intention. Now in this case there is no similar intention also, right? Because similar intention would mean something that even if both X and Y are not were not aware of their intentions, each other's intentions to commit sexual assault, but if both of them had participated in that sexual assault, then there would be similar intention, right? Here, because Mr. X did not have any, did not ever have that intention, the second intention of committing sexual assault, that is why there was a different intention and not similar intention, right? This is why option B, even though it looks correct, is not the correct option, and option C is the correct option. So these are the fine points you should look out for, right? So this is how they will try and confuse you in the question paper. So be aware of these fine, like the difference one word can make, and all of that. Now the next question, which of the following statements is correct in relation to the difference between common intention and similar intention? A. The intention of the accused and co-accused can be inferred from the facts and circumstances of each case. B. Under common intention, it is considered that all the accused have jointly committed the offence themselves and are jointly liable. C. Each accused is liable for the offence he has actually committed if the common intention cannot be proved. Or option D, all of the above. So the correct option is D, as all of the first three statements are in fact correct. Here C, option A, the intention of the accused and co-accused can be inferred from the facts and circumstances from each case. Now this is what the Supreme Court had also said, that common intent, pre-concert, etc. has to be seen from the facts and circumstances of each case. The second option, if common intention is proved, then all accused will be jointly liable. So this is also a correct thing. Even if one person did not actually pull the trigger, but if they had a common intention, then both will be liable for murder. This is also what the passage said. Option C, if common intention is not proved, then each accused will be only be liable for the offence that he committed. Again, this statement is true. Hence, option D is the correct option. All the three statements are correct. So yeah, thank you. This was the end of our fourth lecture on law of crimes. We will be coming out with the lectures on the other sections of CLAT as well. So if you found this lecture helpful, please like and subscribe the video. And yeah, in the next lecture I will be giving you an overview of constitutional law. It will be a bit more lengthy than the lectures up to now, because constitutional law is a vast area to cover. So yeah, look forward to seeing you guys then, and best of luck. Bye bye.